Imagine a world where a child's value was measured not in potential, but in productivity. A world where a single moment of exhaustion, a fleeting lapse in concentration, or a whispered word to a friend could bring down a storm of brutal retribution. We have witnessed the grueling 16-hour days and the meager starvation diets of Victorian factory children. But the system's control did not end with long hours and empty stomachs. It was enforced through a regime of calculated, institutionalized violence designed to break the spirit and discipline the body. This is the hidden history of the brutal punishments inflicted upon the smallest hands that powered Britain's Industrial Revolution. This is the story of the Overlooker's strap, the cruel fines, and the physical torments that were a daily reality for hundreds of thousands of children. The most immediate and visceral symbol of authority in the cotton mill was the Overlooker, and in his hand, his most trusted tool, the leather strap. This was not a simple piece of leather. It was often specially made, thick and tapered, designed to deliver a sharp, stinging pain that could be felt through the thinnest of clothing. The Overlooker, or the devil in the mill, as some children called him, was a figure of absolute power on the factory floor. His job was to maximize production, and he did so through a campaign of terror. The reasons for a beating were endless. A child could be strapped for being late, even by a minute, for talking, for laughing, for stopping to tie a shoe, for the crime of being a child in an adult's world of relentless industry. The punishment was often administered on the spot, in full view of the other workers. The child would be forced to hold out their hands, palms up, and receive a set number of strokes. The crack of the strap would echo momentarily above the din of the machinery, a sharp punctuation mark in the endless roar. The goal was not just to punish the individual, but to send a clear message to every other child in the room. This could be you. Productivity was maintained through fear. The physical wounds, the red, swollen welts on the palms and fingers, would make the already painful work of piecing broken threads agony. But the psychological scars ran deeper. Many former factory children recounted in later life how the sound of a certain kind of machinery or the sight of a leather belt could trigger a flood of terrifying memories, decades after they had left the mill. If the strap was the blunt instrument of punishment, the system of fines was its more insidious, bureaucratic cousin. While the strap caused immediate pain, the fines condemned children and their families to prolonged hunger and desperation. The factory rule books were thick with petty infractions, each carrying a financial penalty that was deducted directly from a child's already pitiful wages. Forget the physical violence for a moment. This was financial violence, a slow and grinding pressure that could break a family. Let's break down the cruel economics. A child might earn a shilling for a 6-day week, but the rule book was designed to take it back. There was a fine for having a dirty machine, even if the dust came from the factory's own air. A fine for whistling, a fine for leaving a window open, a fine for having the temerity to look out of that same window. But the most common and devastating fines were for damage to the material. If a child, exhausted from a 4 a.m. start, let a thread break or made an error, the cost of the wasted cotton or silk would be taken from their wages. The system was rigged. The machinery was often old and faulty. The threads were weak, but the blame always fell on the smallest and most vulnerable worker. The consequence of this system was that a child could work an entire week and bring home almost nothing, a few pence. Sometimes, if the fines exceeded their wages, they would be in debt to the factory, a debt that would be carried over to the next week, binding them even tighter to their servitude. This meant less food on the table. It meant a colder home. It meant a mother going hungry to feed her child. The factory owners understood this perfectly. It was a system of control that reached beyond the factory gates and into the cramped homes of the workers, ensuring compliance not just through fear of pain, but through the even more potent fear of starvation. Beyond the strap and the fines lay a realm of punishments so creatively cruel they defy modern comprehension. These were not the impulsive acts of a brutal overlooker, but often officially sanctioned torments designed to humiliate and inflict maximum suffering. One of the most notorious was weight dragging. A child who was consistently late or deemed lazy might be forced to wear a heavy weight tied around their neck. This could be a massive piece of iron, a heavy wooden log, or even a full brick. They would then be made to parade up and down the factory floor for hours, a walking spectacle of shame and submission. The weight, often 20, 30, or even 40 pounds, would strain their underdeveloped necks and spines, causing permanent damage. They became a lesson for others, a living cautionary tale. Another common punishment was confinement. Some factories had small, dark closets or cupboards specifically built for this purpose. A child could be locked inside for hours, in total darkness, with no water and no toilet. The air would be thick and suffocating. The psychological terror for a young child, alone in the dark, listening to the muffled roar of the machinery they were trapped within, is unimaginable. Other forms of confinement were even more diabolical. Some children were forced to sit inside a large, empty material basket that was then hoisted high up to the ceiling, dangling precariously above the hard factory floor for the duration of their shift. They were isolated, terrified, and on display. Then there were the punishments that directly targeted the body's most sensitive areas. Some overlookers would pinch the ears of children until they bled. Others would drag them by their hair across the factory floor. A punishment known as bobbing involves striking children sharply on the head. The sheer variety of these torments reveals a chilling truth. The factory system had created an environment where the infliction of pain upon children had become normalized, systematized, and even industrialized. In the Victorian factory, the machinery itself was an ever-present, indiscriminate punisher. While accidents happened due to fatigue and lack of safety guards, there were horrifying instances where the machinery was deliberately used as an instrument of discipline. An overlooker, angry at a child for making a mistake, might grab their hand and deliberately push it towards the moving parts of a machine as a threat, a terrifying game of chicken that sometimes ended in tragedy. The message was clear. If you do not pay attention, this machine will take your fingers. And if I am angry enough, I might help it. But the most common and accepted use of the machine as punisher was the practice of washing a child's head in the water trough that cooled the machinery's bearings. If a child was caught dozing off, a natural reaction for an exhausted, malnourished child working from 4 a.m., the overlooker would grab them by the scruff of the neck and forcibly dunk their head into the trough. The water was often scalding hot from the heat of the machinery, causing severe scalds to the scalp, face, and ears. In the winter, the same water could be freezing cold. This was not just a shocking wake-up call, it was a painful and dangerous assault that could lead to infections, burns, and long-term health issues. The fact that this was a standard, widely reported practice shows how little regard was held for the children's bodily autonomy and safety. Their bodies were seen as extensions of the machines they served, to be maintained or disciplined with equal coldness. In the face of this overwhelming brutality, it would be easy to imagine the children as completely broken, passive victims. But the human spirit is resilient, and even here, in the darkest corners of the mills, there were flickers of resistance. This resistance was rarely overt. Open rebellion meant immediate dismissal and starvation for the whole family. Instead, it was subtle, silent, and clever. Children developed secret warning systems, a cough, a dropped tool, to signal when the overlooker was approaching. They learned to sleep with their eyes open, mastering the art of the micro-nap while still maintaining the motion of their work. They would take turns covering for one another, creating small pockets of solidarity in the industrial hellscape. They also engaged in small acts of sabotage. A thread might be accidentally broken more often, slowing the machine just enough for a moment's respite. A tool might be misplaced. But the most significant form of resistance was simply enduring. To wake up every day and walk back into that mill, to face the strap, the fines, and the torment, required a profound, quiet courage. This daily endurance was in itself an act of defiance. Over time, this silent suffering did not go unnoticed. The courage of these children and the horrific testimonies they began to give to early social reformers and government inquiries became the catalyst for change. Their stories, told in their own simple, heartbreaking words, pierced the public conscience. The legacy of this brutal disciplinary system is a stain on the history of the Industrial Revolution. It created a generation marked not only by physical stunting and disease from malnutrition, but also by deep psychological trauma. The constant state of fear in which these children lived rewired their understanding of the world. It taught them that their worth was negligible, that authority was arbitrary and cruel, and that childhood was a luxury they could not afford. Many carried a lifelong aversion to authority figures. Others struggled with intense anxiety and what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress. This system also had a profound impact on the very structure of the family. Parents, themselves often working in the same mills, were powerless to protect their children. They could not protest the beatings or challenge the fines without losing their own jobs. The traditional role of the parent as protector was systematically dismantled by the economic imperatives of the factory. The factory owner became the ultimate authority, and the family unit was weakened, becoming merely a source of labor. The punishments in the mill thus reached into the home, distorting relationships and leaving a legacy of powerlessness and intergenerational trauma that would take decades to heal. The story of Victorian factory punishments is more than a historical curiosity. It is a stark lesson in what happens when human beings are reduced to mere components in a machine of profit. The crack of the Overlooker's strap is an echo from our past, but its message resonates today. It asks us how we value human dignity in the face of economic progress. It forces us to look at the systems we have now and question where, in our modern world, we allow the vulnerable to be punished for the crime of their own circumstances. The empty bowls we discussed before were a tragedy of omission. The brutal punishments were a tragedy of commission, a deliberate, calculated infliction of suffering. The children of the mills bore the weight of an empire's ambition on their small shoulders, and the scars from the straps, the fines and the weight